Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more of the Great War. This time we are on to week 152, the Disillusionment of Lawrence of Arabia. The Great War, week 152. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. I am currently playing through Baldur's Gate 3. As of recording this, I'm recording this its first weekend after its full release. So, when will this be up? A few days after or so? Or like Wednesday? I don't know. I'm trying to be better about being able to guess when I upload these, but math is hard and I'm lazy. Anyways, let's go ahead and dive right in.
Every nation fighting this war has rallied its people using love of the homeland and national identity to call them to fight. But how do you rally people to fight for a nation when they have no sense of national identity?
I mean, yes, but I think especially by this point in time in modern history, I think because he's clearly, I think, referencing Arabia. Um, the idea of perhaps an Arab state. Um, I think that nationality was already there in terms of a culture. Um, and especially, they also have an easier um means of accessing that nationality through the shared fact of um being ruled over by the Ottomans for however many centuries. Um, I think is I think by this time they have that semblance of nationality, just not to the extent that we see their way of mainly what's unifying them is just fighting against the Ottomans. I think at this point in time, um, because obviously when the war ends and the West doesn't provide like any assistance to the guy that they um, originally worked alongside to make this Arab state, um, they and then he loses to the guy that would eventually be the founder of like Saudi Arabia. I can't remember the name, but head of the he's dead now. Former head of the Saud family. Um, so yeah, I think the unity was the nationality was there. Just the um, sometimes people need help, to get to those places. I was going to make, I feel like, a smart, intellectual, poignant point with this rambling, and then I lost it along the way, but I just kept talking, hoping I could find the path again, and I can't. So, whoopsies.
I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, the mutinies in the French army continued. They were now weeks old and the situation was dire. The Russian army was also in chaos post-revolution. The king of Greece abdicated after an Allied ultimatum, and the Allies occupied neutral Greek territory. The Italians began a new offensive in the Trentino, and the Battle of Messines, a British victory, came to an end.
Uh, Man, what is happening to Greece in this war is so fucked up, dude.
That battle
There's a lot of fucked up things in this war, but it's kind of the fact that the Entente continuously try to um poise themselves as like helping people, right? They're helping. They want to help. Um and especially the UK here got pissed at Germany for violating Belgium's neutrality. Of course, Germany didn't really Germany was like pretty upfront about it. You know, Germany was like, "Hey, let us move our troops through your borders so that we can go fight France." And Belgium was like, "No," and then Germany just walked in anyway. Like Germany wasn't doing anything. What Germany did was scummy for sure, fucked up, absolutely. But they were at least upfront about the fucked upness. UK is over here like occupying Greece like it's a foreign enemy, but continues to pretend that they're on like the Greek side. That to me more fucked up, that the pretending of being an ally when your actions are completely different. Um, yeah.
Was sort of a prologue for British Commander Sir Douglas Haig's upcoming major Flanders offensive. He still didn't have London's approval for it, though, and on June 19th, he met with Prime Minister David Lloyd George and his Cabinet Committee on War
God, they are so British. My God.
Policy, and Chief of Staff Wally Robertson to explain what his plans entailed. This meeting lasted the rest of the week and was pretty raucous. Haig laid out all his grand plans, and Lloyd George assaulted him with questions. Why did the generals think a Flanders offensive would work this time if it didn't last time? How were the German defenses set up? What would the casualties be? And what if it didn't work out? The Royal Navy was called in for an opinion and sided with Haig. Admiral John Jellicoe even said that Britain could not continue the war for another year unless the Belgian coast was taken, which certainly raised some eyebrows. At the end of it all,
Hold on, Mr. John Jellicoe, let's go back a step and explain this thought process here, because I fail to see why the Flanders coast is that important.
Lloyd George gave Haig's offensive the green light, though he was far from won over. He knew well that opposing Haig and Robertson without broad bipartisan support would leave him vulnerable in the House of Commons. Here's a quote from A World Undone. In a way very reminiscent of what Nivelle had proclaimed when his plans for the Chemin des Dames were challenged, Haig said that if his scheme did not succeed, it could quickly be called off. The losses could be ended while still at tolerable levels. Reluctantly and resentfully, certain he was witnessing Great War stupidity at its worst, Lloyd George told Haig to proceed with his preparations. That book goes on to explain something interesting, that
why hasn't Haig been sacked yet? I feel like we've seen so many other generals get sacked for less. But like, why hasn't Haig? I don't think Haig doesn't seem to have much political affiliation back in the UK. He doesn't seem to be like, you know, just right, like the reason part of the reason why Luigi Cadorna hasn't been sacked is because of he has lots of political friends, if I'm remembering correctly. And the reason why fucking Hotzendorf in Austria-Hungary wasn't sacked because he had the same. I think he was friends with the emperor, and then when the emperor died and the kid inherited, Hotzendorf got sacked. I think if I'm remembering the timeline of events correctly. Like, why hasn't Haig?
in a broader context, it showed the strength of the British system. Haig now had permission to get an attack ready, but not control of overall strategy. The civil government had granted him permission, and the discussion was at the behest of the Prime Minister, who had the last word. Everyone accepted this, so the Constitution was intact. I'd like to say a few words about the British War Policy Committee. It was made up of the Prime Minister, Lord Alfred Milner, a member of the War Cabinet, South African General Jan Smuts, Andrew Bonar Law, leader of the Conservative Party and Chancellor of the Exchequer, and Lord Curzon, former Viceroy of India and also a member of the War Cabinet. It had met for the first time early this June. Its purpose was to get at the facts and review the entire policy and strategy of the war. You'd think that since this war was nearly 3 years old, a committee to consider just those facts would have sprung up by now, but you'd be wrong. Anyhow, that committee concluded during its first meeting that the place to strike at the Central Powers was actually Italy, and they should send over 12 British divisions from the Western Front, which would have seriously thrown a spanner into Haig's plans. But as I said, he managed to get the go-ahead for his Flanders offensive. But here's something important. The War Policy Committee, for whatever reason, had not authorized Haig's offensive. They had just authorized preparations. Big difference there.
Huh.
And now,
What?
while the ground in Flanders was still dry and the summer rains had yet to come, they deferred their final decision, but precious time was ticking by. And time was...
You know, Haig is one that confused, like, largely for the most part, I do believe in letting, generals fight their wars and leave, obviously all war is political, but like when it comes to the actual fighting of the war, um have the generals, try and keep like the political establishment out of it as best as possible, right? Let the generals do what they were trained and taught to do, which is command and fight wars. And then the politicians worry about making sure the war, the public opinion for the war is still positive, right? And politicians do what they do best, lie to people, and then the generals do what they do best, kill people. I may be cynical. I don't know if you guys can tell.
Was ticking by for another British war persona, Lawrence of Arabia, who was having serious doubts this month about the success of the Arab revolt. One of his compatriots, Nasib al-Bakri, who had accompanied him on his latest expedition, wanted to go north to Damascus to incite revolt among the urban nationalists there. Lawrence figured that the nomadic Bedouin, with their reputation for violence, would find fear there rather than friendship. But more importantly, he did not think that Syrians would respond to any call to arms. He had written earlier this year, Syria and Syrian are foreign words. Unless he has learned English or French, the inhabitant of these parts has no word to describe all his country. Syria in Turkish, the word exists not in Arabic, is the province of Damascus. An Aleppine always calls himself an Aleppine, a Beiruti, and so down to the smallest villages. There is no national feeling.
So that is also something that is kind of, I guess you could see relatively unique to the Arabic culture. Because, okay, so I did a little bit of research, and for anyone that knows more than me, feel free to correct me if I say anything wrong here. But for my research, when it especially when it comes to how their names work, we get this sense of where their sense of like community kind of comes from, right? It's like so you have your first name, which is your personal name, and then the way you like identify yourself further is it's like I believe it then goes father's name will be your like last name, and then I think you have your tribe name, or is it then village then tribe? I mean, I guess village and tribe could end up being the same thing. Um, I'm really rusty on this information though, so but yeah, that's something just in Bedouin Arabic culture that I've seen when like doing research for names and stuff for my fantasy book. Because there are some things that there's a little part of the world, there's a part of the world that borrows heavily from kind of Bedouin uh, and Amazigh kind of culture. So of course, I had to do some research on how their names and stuff work. But yeah, he isn't entirely wrong, but I think he's kind of I'm telling Lawrence Arabia is doing something wrong here. I feel like this is one of those times where he's focusing on perhaps the wrong thing. He shouldn't be like if you want like if we go pretty this is a little harsh, but if we go into just thinking about winning this war and inciting rebellion against the Ottoman Empire, he should not be because of this, he should not be looking towards appealing to their sense of nationality. He instead should be looking towards finding whatever the local reason is for disliking the Ottoman Empire and using that, not nationality, but instead like maybe a hatred of Ottoman rule after centuries, um, which of course kind of lines up with nationalism, but like we kind of see nationalism appear for a group of people out of that comes up as they fight against an imperial power or like the empire that or the empire that's conquered them has ruled them for however long, you know, ends up creating that national identity um, through them just being like kind of seen as a foreign people ruling a foreign land. Anyways, tangent over.
Bakri headed for Damascus anyhow, and Lawrence expected him to ruin the revolt by premature action. And another revolt seemed to be winding down, the mutiny in the French army. Tens of thousands of men had mutinied against being ordered to make repeated suicidal attacks and had complained of lack of leave and low pay. French commander Philippe Pétain, rather than just crack down and execute the ringleaders, was using a shrewd combination of both the carrot and the stick to appease the mutineers. First off, he immediately brought morale up by instituting a system whereby every man was guaranteed 7 days leave, later 10 days, every 4 months. He also ordered that...
God damn. Our soldiers have it good today. I mean, they still get, trauma. Lots of it. But, at least you get to see your families sometimes. More often than being in the past. That's nice. Progress.
Living conditions be generally improved. And another big thing, he had mutineers court-martialed, but he did not use the classic summary trial followed by swift execution. Okay, some of those probably did happen, but details weren't recorded. Anyhow, 23,385 soldiers were sentenced for mutinous behavior, and 412 mutineers were sentenced to death between May and October 1917. But of those, only 55 executions were carried out.
Huh.
Most of the rest were commuted to hard labor in the colonies. And so, and most sources kind of say, thanks to Pétain, the French army began to recover its determination and confidence, but there were no French plans for new offensives. Pétain himself said this week on the 18th, "I will maintain this repression firmly, but without forgetting that it applies to soldiers who have been in the trenches with us for 3 years and are our soldiers." The mutinies would be entirely over within 6 weeks. There was some action in the field this week in the Trentino. Last week, the Italians were stuck on the mountainside under fire from Austrian artillery. Snow and clouds stopped the general fire, but they still remained there until the 18th. But when the skies cleared, they were hit by Austrian artillery, infantry, and bomber aircraft. They had taken and lost Mount Ortegara, and the casualty list grew. And in local news, Heinrich von Clam-Martinitz resigned as
That's a fucking name that I've never heard before.
Austrian Prime Minister. He will be replaced by Ernst Seidler von Feuchtenegg.
That man just looks like a villain.
And will become military governor of occupied Montenegro. And this week, Arthur Currie takes command of the Canadian troops in France. And the week ends with the Italians taking heavy losses in the mountains, the French army mutinies finally winding down, Lawrence of Arabia wondering how you persuade people who feel no...
My fellow Americans, you'll understand this reference. What's Aleppo? Literally, the Libertarian Party is a fucking joke, dude. Oh my god. Honestly, that political ideology is just a fucking joke. Ugh. I saw a fucking gnat. Where'd you go? Stupid tiny fly thing. Fucking probably hovering near my ring light now.
Nationalism that they are a nation, and Sir Douglas Haig preparing for a huge offensive as his government plays the waiting game and kicks the can down the road. I'll end with something else about Lawrence this week. He had met Mark Sykes a month ago and had recently learned the details of the Sykes-Picot agreement to partition the Middle East among the Entente after the war. Both Sykes and Francois Picot were meeting with Arab revolt leaders in May and assuring them of the future independence of Arab states, just with foreign advisors. Lawrence was utterly dejected and disgusted by this point with the concessions that Sykes had made to the French concerning Syria, which would reward the French at the end of the war for the risks the Arabs had taken during it. But Lawrence still saw a glimmer of hope. If he could, in fact, help the Arabs win Syria, he could stop French ambitions. On a telegram sheet, he wrote to Gilbert Clayton, his boss and head of British intelligence in Egypt. I've decided to go off alone to Damascus, hoping to get killed on the way. For all our sakes, try and clear this show up before it goes further. We are getting them to fight for us on a lie, and I can't stand it.
Respect.
If you want to learn more about Lawrence of Arabia, you can click right here for our special episode.
And that was the Disillusionment of Lawrence of Arabia, the Great War, week 152. Got nothing to add here at the end. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.